My Corona knitting machine is now knitting like a dream. And so to celebrate, we're going to make a next best thing pillow together, the standard gauge version. I actually have 2 designs by that name, and I have come to find these pillows the last word in comfort. Both patterns are found in their written form in this book, Blanket and Pillow Collection for All Knitting Machines, and there will be a link to where you can buy the book in the program notes in case that interests you. All of these are next best thing pillows. The bulky versions are pictured on the book cover. There are 3 gauges, and today we'll knit the standard gauge version of this one. Here's where you find it in the table of contents in the book. This is next best thing pillow number 2, and we're working on the standard gauge version today, though there are 3 gauges. Any standard gauge machine can use this pattern. The reason I particularly want to knit it on the Corona today is partly to celebrate the success with the machine, and partly because short rowing on the Corona is an absolute breeze. And this version of the next best thing pillow requires lots of short rows. As long as you know how to short row effectively, you can make this using any short rowing method, including the knit wrap knit method. But what I'm going to do is an automatic wrap, which means that every time I put some needles in hold and knit across, I add 1 needle to hold after that knit across to prevent the hole. The effect is similar to, but not identical to, an actual wrap. It creates a little bit smoother fabric. The difference is slight. Many people wouldn't even notice, but being a knitter, you will. To create the shape, we knit more rows on each end than we do in the middle, and this is where the short rows join the full length rows. When we zoom in, you can see that there are no holes in the fabric. In case you are new to short rowing, I will explain. Where the short and long rows meet, there's a tendency, if we neither wrap nor automatic wrap, for holes to form right here. Here are the dimensions we're aiming at. Use the heavy end of number 1 or a number 2 yarn and adjust for a tight fabric that gets 7 stitches 10 rows per inch. There are several ways to cast on, bind off, and seam, but I'm going to suggest this simple one, that we begin in waste yarn, casting on across 126 stitches, and we'll seam it on the machine later. Using this simple method, the seam will show on the outside of the pillow. That's not something I mind, but if you do, you may begin and end in scrap yarn and graft, or cast on and bind off in the ordinary way so as to be able to hide the seam more on the inside of the fabric. You must also know your hold versus knit back from hold settings. On this machine, 2 knits back from hold, 1 holds, because we'll be toggling between them often. On the Silver Reed family of machine, it's also similar levers, and on Brothers, it's the NH button. After the waste yarn rows, and if you used one, a ravel cord worked in from left to right, knit the main yarn from right to left, which I did off camera. After that row, set the row counter to 0. This is way more important for this project than most projects. With the carriage on the left, place 77 stitches on the right into hold. Knit across, 1 more into hold, knit back, 1 more into hold, knit right, 1 more into hold, knit left, 1 more. Go right and left 1 more time, placing needles into hold. So we've knitted 6 short rows being ones that don't include every needle. Now set the carriage to knit back from hold and knit 3 full-length rows. That's part 1 of the design repeat. Now we need to do the same thing from the other side of the work. That's part 2. Place 77 stitches on the left in the hold. You could also describe this as on the side opposite the carriage, because that's where it has to be. And again, 6 short rows. After knitting each of them, place an additional needle into hold next to the needles that are already in hold. Then set the carriage to knit back from hold and knit 3 full-length rows. And you're ready to repeat from the opposite side. Repeat this entire sequence 20 times. By the time you finish, the row counter should read 360. The row count sounds huge for the amount of fabric we're actually knitting. That's because we're counting rows on one end and then rows across every needle and then rows on the other end. There's no place on the fabric that actually contains 360 rows. This is why you so badly need to use the row counter, because it would be very hard to keep track otherwise. Depending on how you're going to finish the piece, you may like to knit one more row before binding off. That's just for your convenience. If you want to get on one side or the other, it affects the design hardly at all. You could now scrap off and then graft, or bind off and make a traditional seam. But what I'm doing here is going to lift the first row of main yarn stitches and hang them on the working needles. Once each needle has 2 sets of stitches on it, I'll bind off, creating the seam simultaneously. And this is the result. Now I just need to remove my waste yarn. Since I did not knit in a row of ravel cord, I could either unravel it row by row or do what I am doing, and that's snip it in a place or two and pull out the first row of waste yarn that was knitted adjacent to the main yarn, leaving a clean edge. And there it comes. What we have is a piece of fabric shaped more or less like this. One of the edges of the work should now be gathered in on a sturdy piece of main yarn in a yarn tail, work just next to the edge column of stitches. Draw the gathering cord in and knot it securely, and then working from the other end, we're going to stuff it. Stitch across the gathered O so the stuffing won't fall out. Then upend the pillow so you can fill it with fiber fill. Now stitch in and out of the fabric on the open end so as to be able to gather it in to match the first end. And be sure to knot it securely closed and stitch across the O also. The variegated effect of my sample was achieved by running 2 very thin yarns together to get the gauge. And voila, the finished pillow, super comfy. This project goes very fast. You do not have to be absolutely perfect as to gauge, and it fits everybody. So it's a great gift as well as something for yourself.